Hi there, Telebait here with a new Runeterra deck guide. This time we're going to be taking a look at one of the new champions to the game, Shyvana, and build a dragon deck around her. In my opinion, the dragon archetype's a really fun archetype, but quite simple in terms of decisions to pilot it, but that doesn't stop it being really fun. And in fact, it has one of my favourite cards in the game in it, which is the Sky's Descend. And if you play a dragon deck, I highly recommend you include this, just for the hilarious moments where you wipe your opponent's board for only 5 or 7 mana. As always with my videos, I'll show you what I run in my deck and why, then I'll take you through how to mulligan with the deck, then we'll get into some game reviews to show you how I pilot the deck. So let's get into the video. The way I built this deck is centered around mid-range dragons like Shyvana, White Flame, Firebrand, Screeching Dragon, and Involas Vox. Involas Vox was actually a card I thought was really bad and then grew on me over time. I found with this deck there were so many times you just ran out of cards, and Vox single-handedly mitigates that problem. I also run the Herald of Dragons in this deck. This is so huge to help get a tempo advantage. The difference between playing Shyvana on turn 3 and turn 4 is so huge. On turn 3 she seems OP, on turn 4 she seems a little underpowered. You could run Mobilize to help reliably get this early Shyvana out. I found when I tested out Mobilize it just bricked out your hand too often, and I think just running the Herald of Dragons is enough. Because in those situations where you draw a Herald of Dragons later on in the game, you can still use it as a chump blocker. The other synergy cards I run are Dragon's Clutch and Dragon Guard Lieutenant. Dragon's Clutch mainly to help mitigate the running out of cards problems I mentioned with Vox, and Dragon Guard Lieutenant helps massively in the early game against aggro decks. The other new dragon synergy cards I wasn't really a big fan of. Egghead Researcher gets your random dragon, but honestly I'd rather just pick the dragon I want and run that in my deck instead. And Dragon Guard Lookout I find is just not as good as Relentless Pursuit. Pursuit can be done with just spell mana, which is huge, meaning you can fully develop your board. Rally is required in this deck to win against control decks though, and there is some argument to run 3 copies of Pursuit plus some Dragon Guard Lookouts on top of that, but I feel like that's a bit overkill on the rally. The last dragon synergy card I run is Sky's Descend, and I'll be honest, mostly this is just because it's fun. When I was just having some fun with it, it actually did win me a few games, and I have become quite a big fan of this card, and I do think you want to run at least one in your dragon deck. It helps so much in the mirror, it helps against decks like Deep. It could just help clear the board and then allows your dragons to get off your attacks to win the game. The one thing though is it becomes very difficult to use against Lee Sin and War Mother's decks, which are quite popular in the meta at the moment. To help against aggressive decks, I also run Fiora and Brightsteel Protector. These are huge. You can use Fiora as an alternative win condition against aggro, and even if you're not using her as a win condition, she helps control the board in a similar way to Dragon Guard Lieutenant. And although I think Dragon Guard Lieutenant's better just because he's 1 mana cheaper, I think having more challenges is really good in this deck. And Brightsteel Protector is huge. It allows you to block and keep a unit alive, and this deck is so vulnerable to wide boards because you're often only playing 1 unit a turn, spending all your mana on 1 unit. If your opponent is developing many units a turn, you just get overwhelmed in numbers and they chip you down and beat you that way. But this is why Brightsteel's so good in this deck against aggro, because it allows you to keep up with their number of units. And I would say using Brightsteel Protector well is so important in this deck, both into the aggro and control matchups. To have some interaction with our opponent's plan, which is an important part on any deck. If you run a deck without any way to interact with your opponent's board, you just struggle to win. Like, let's say something like TF, they just eventually level it up, and then once TF's levels, you lose because you don't have any way to interact. It's really important to run some interaction in your decks. And because of this, I run 3 copies of Single Combats and Concerted Strikes. I did try Concerted Strike versus Strafing Strike, and in my opinion, paying the extra mana for Concerted Strike is just worth it. It keeps your unit at full health, and it gives you more reach and damage, which allows you to kill things like Leviathan, Trundle, level 2 Tryndamere more easily, and can make the difference between winning or losing a game. Finally, I run Pale Cascades, that's because they're OP. It's kind of as simple as that. I did experiment with using Sharp Sight, but the draw from Pale Cascade is just so much better than the 1 health from Sharp Sight, and it isn't too difficult to trigger Nightfall. There is the odd situation where your opponent open attacks and it feels bad using Pale Cascade, not getting the draw. But then you compare it to Sharp Sight where you never get the draw anyway, and Pale Cascade is just so much better. The 1 extra health really doesn't make a difference most of the time. So onto the mulligan. Against aggro, I always keep Fiora, Brightsteel and Dragon Guard Lieutenant. As mentioned before, it's just to try and thin down their board, because what you're really afraid of is them having a really wide board and you only having 1 or 2 dragons when they have a full board. You just can't stop the onslaught of damage. Against control, I keep the same, but you can be a bit more greedy with what you keep as well. I keep Relentless Pursuit because Relentless Pursuit is really important to help you close out games against control decks, especially ones which run Ruination or a lot of healing. And I also keep Herald of Dragons, Shyvana and White Flame Protector, just to help you with that early curve out. If you can get the round 2 Herald of Dragons into round 3 Shyvana or White Flame, that usually sets you up really well for the rest of the game. So for this first game review against a Pyro aggro deck using an MF and Gangplank, this is a very popular deck on ladder, so it should be a good test of how this deck performs against the meta decks on ladder. Looking at our hand here, most of the hand's quite bad. The only card worth keeping is Dragon Guard Lieutenant because he can help deal with our opponent's board early on. All the other cards are just too slow against this aggressive deck. So unfortunately we got a bunch of other slow cards as well once we got them away, so we're a bit unlucky with this hand. Hopefully we can top deck some good answers though. We do have the saving grace that he is attacking on evens, which means we do have a chance to play a Lieutenant before he gets any attacks in. Or alternatively he could open attack, but we're quite happy that we're on turn 2 and only taking 2 damage so far, so I'm happy with that. Going to the next turn, we top deck Brightsteel Protector. This is huge. This card is so important against aggro, especially using it on your challenger units like Fiora or Lieutenant. It allows us to get a decent trade-off. He does pass back straight away, which probably means he's hiding something like a Misfortune from our challenger. He could have a Make It Rain as well, and that's something we want to consider playing around here. So going through the logic of what to challenge here, you needed to think through both scenarios if he had Make It Rain. If we challenge his 3-3 and he uses Make It Rain, our 3-2 challenger would die. We couldn't use Pale Cascade to save him. And if he blocks the 3-2, that dies as well, and we couldn't use Pale Cascade to save our Brightsteel either. However, if we hook the 2-1 here and he uses Make It Rain, we can use Pale Cascade to save our challenger. And if he blocks the 3-2 with the 3-3, we're happy, and if he doesn't block, we can just trade our 3-2 into his 3-3 whenever he attacks with it. So he doesn't actually play something like an MF here, which is surprising because I don't see why he wouldn't just play these units anyway. So for our turn here, the only cards we can play are Pale Cascade or Concerted Strike. We can't even play both of them. And when you're in positions like this, where you don't really have a good play, and you're probably going to burn mana, you need to consider how much mana you're actually using when you play a card. So we're burning 3 mana here regardless. So if we use Concerted Strike, it's effectively only paying 2 mana for the Concerted Strike. So would you pay 2 mana to kill his Zap Spray thing? If your answer is no, I don't know what's wrong with you. It's a 4 mana card, you would happily pay 2 mana to get rid of it, which is why I use the Concerted Strike to kill Zap Spray thing here. It could be tempting to use it to kill the 2-1, but then you need to think through, if one survives, what does more damage for him on the following turns? If his Zap Spray thing survives and he gets an attack off with it, it will do 2 damage to me. If the Saboteur survives and he attacks with it, we'll only get 1 damage off because I'll probably have a unit to block it, and therefore I think it's better to kill the Zap. Hopefully that makes some sense. So here we have the choice of Fuse Firebrand or Screeching Dragon. Against an aggressive deck I'd always go for Screeching Dragon. It then just allows us to clear his board nice and easily. Interestingly, he passes here, which means he probably wants to play a unit that is protecting it. If we pass back here, we'd be burning 4 of his mana. The only disadvantage is we wouldn't kill his 2-1, and therefore if he attacks with his 2-1, he would be getting 1 damage in still. But him spending 4 mana to get in 1 more damage, I'm very happy with that. The hand is a bit clunky here. Like, if he develops a wide board, that could be a problem. In terms of what to play on this turn, we could play Fuse Firebrand and Pale Cascade, but we really don't need the Pale Cascade, and an extra draw isn't that helpful anyway. Our biggest limitation really is mana. We're struggling to get enough mana to play all our hand anyway, so we don't really need the extra card. Therefore, I think it's better to play Involus Fox. It's also more efficient with our regular mana, because if we play Involus Fox here, it gives us 7 mana next turn, which we can use on units. So if we get a 2-drop, we can play both the Fuse Firebrand and the 2-drop. He just attacks him with the Zap Spray thing, which I'm completely happy with. We get the Brightsteel Protector off the top. This is pretty good and gives us quite a few options this turn, and options is always good. We always play the Fuse Firebrand here, and it then gives us the option of playing Pale Cascade, Relentless Pursuit, or Brightsteel Protector. We run through how those options play out. If we play Brightsteel, we can attack in with it, and it trades for 1 unit, or we can use it to block next turn. Either way, Brightsteel only trades for 1 unit, and the barrier in this scenario doesn't seem that useful. All our units have plenty of health, and barrier really doesn't matter. Similarly, the extra stats from Pale Cascade doesn't matter, and the draw doesn't really matter. As mentioned before, we're more limited by mana, not being able to play out a hand. So the next best option with our remaining mana is Relentless Pursuit, or we could just save the mana for next turn. If we do bank the mana, we are a bit concerned that he's got quite a wide board, and I do want to start clearing it out. This is why I think Relentless Pursuit's the best option here, just because it forces him to block and allows me to start clearing his board out. So he uses double Noxian Fervor here. This is pretty scary. I would have loved to see a single combat, that way we could have stopped one of them, and then we would have been on 8 health, which would have been plenty to see through the rest of this game. Because we're only 5 health, things are starting to look a bit sketchy here. We do stick to the plan I mentioned before, which is to use Relentless Pursuit. We hook in the 2-1, which saves us 1 health on our Nexus, which is huge because it keeps us out of Decimate range. So going into the next turn, he plays Crack Shot. This is pretty bad because it puts us down to 4 health, and therefore if he has a Decimate in hand, we 100% lose. But being in situations like this does make your decision making easier, as if he has Decimate, there's nothing we can do, so we don't bother playing around it. Similarly, if he has the third Noxian Fervor here, we will lose. Because he's used 2 already, the chances he has the third is really unlikely. This is quite a good way to work out what you need to play around. If they've used 2 of a card already, it's quite unlikely they've got a third. Sometimes you can make hand reads, which does suggest they've got a conky hand and might have 3 Noxian Fervor. But he's curved out quite well this game, so I'll be pretty surprised if he does have the third Noxian Fervor, and therefore it's not a card I'm going to play around either. So he uses Make It Rain, which is great. It means he doesn't have Decimate. He uses the other Make It Rain, and fortunately this one didn't hit our Nexus as well, otherwise we could end up dying to something like Warning Shot or Parley. Here, the only card we're worried about him top decking is Decimate. Anything else he has either won't do enough damage to kill us, or it will be something we can't play around anyway, like Noxian Fervor. So we open attack, this way we don't give him an action to use Decimate. He could try to survive by, let's say, blocking the 6-5 and then using Make It Rain and hope it hits the 7-1. But even if he does that, we have Pale Cascade. Unless he has Noxian Fervor, we 100% win by open attacking, and he surrenders. That's GG. So for our next game, I actually really wanted to show this deck against a War Mother's deck, but when I came to recording games on this, honestly, all the War Mother's decks just disappeared. So I'm showcasing it against the Swain TF deck, which is another sort of control-y deck. Swain TF does have the ability to be quite aggressive as well, but it's the best matchup I could find into a control deck at the time, because ladder was just filled with aggro decks at the moment. So we got Herald of Dragons here, and it's not a great card into their deck because they can just kill it with Make It Rain. But what's quite fortunate here is we're attacking it on odds, which means he gets the first action on turn 2. And if he plays a 2-mana unit, we can then play a Herald of Dragons. If he doesn't play a 2-mana unit and passes, we'll just have to play the Dragon Guard Lieutenant. So he does play a unit, so that's an easy Herald of Dragons here. Their deck doesn't run anything which can kill it for 1 mana. And this is huge because it means we can get the Shyvana down turn 3. And this is what you really want with this deck. Herald of Dragons turn 2 into a 4-mana dragon next turn. One thing we do need to try and play around here is Ravenous Flock. And actually, quite fortunately, he plays the Petty Officer, which means we can attack with a Shyvana, start working on a level up condition, and she won't take any damage, so she won't die to Ravenous Flock. So in this scenario, this deck is really simple to play. You just play your big dragons. In this case, I actually prefer Fuse Firebrand to the Screeching Dragon just because the Spell Shield is quite important into this matchup. So he uses Make It Rain and pops the Spell Shield immediately, so that's not great. And Shyvana's hurt here, which means she is at risk of dying to a Ravenous Flock. Because she's at risk of dying to a flock, what we really want to do is barrier her, so then my opponent needs to use at least 2 spells to kill her.
You're covered.
What's the fire breath this time?
A soldier should know to stay out of the way.
So he uses Death's Hand on the Right Steel Protector, which actually makes no sense to me. He should have 100% used it on the Lieutenant, but he didn't for some reason. Like, that is just an awful play. So here, he's completely burnt out of mana, so we don't need to be worried about Flock, and we can just attack in with Shyvana. Even if he did have mana for Flock, we can still attack in here, because Shyvana would level from the attack, getting her up to 5 health. We always hook the Elusive unit in here, just to get rid of that annoying chip damage, and it could potentially be a Riptide Rex activator later on. So as before, we're really trying to play around Flock here. So blocking with the Fuse Firebrand, and I don't block with Shyvana. This isn't an aggro deck, so the extra damage doesn't really matter. I really want to keep Shyvana alive. I play the Screeching Dragon here instead of Vox just because we don't really need the extra card advantage here at the moment and the challenge is more effective, especially because I'm really concerned about a Riptide Rex in turn 8 and I want to fin his board so we can't get an attack in to proc Riptide Rex. So here we always develop Involos Vox. The only downside to playing him is it does mean we can't use Concerted Strike, but at 7 mana there's nothing he can play which would need a Concerted Strike anyway, so we're fairly safe playing Involos Vox here. So he passes back, and it's really tempting to burn 4 mana here, but I feel it's much better to attack because then we can get the Strafing Strike from Shyvana's attack. As before, we're hooking the keg with Shyvana just so she takes no damage, and that way our opponent can't use Flock or Scorched Earth on her, and we can keep generating Strafing Strikes every turn. Interestingly, he uses Noxian Fervor just to do damage on Nexus. He might have like triple Noxian Fervor in hand to have a bit of reach to kill me. Because of that, I feel like it's really important to deny this Noxian Fervor here. It also hurts his progression to his Swain level up quite a lot as well. The only real choice here is about who I use to strafe and strike with. I could use the Fuse Firebrand, but then if he has a Death's Hand or a Ravenous Flock, they can deny the strafe and strike and the Noxian Fervor still goes through, so I really don't want to do that. The best decision out of the remaining dragons is to use it on Screeching Dragon just so we get a more even spread of stats across the board. If we stacked all our stats onto one unit, he could just keep chump blocking that unit and we get less damage through. Additionally, if he has a way to kill that unit, it means we lose a lot of our stats, which is why I prefer my stats being more evenly distributed. Okay, so turn 8, he drops the Leviathan immediately. This is a huge mistake. This is the easiest Concerted Strike of my life. Like, I feel like this is a Concerted Strike straight into a forfeit. Like, it's such a bad play to play Leviathan here.
Shroud the world in wings.
It is already done.
There we go, there's the surrender. That was actually such a big mistake, but I don't really think he had a good position in it. We were always going to keep the 5 mana up for the Leviathan there, and he can't just keep passing back as our dragons will just keep chipping him down. So he didn't really have a decent way out and was probably just hoping we didn't have the Concerted Strike. Hopefully from these games you can see how this deck can still be quite effective against strong meta decks. I did get some good draws, and I'm not going to lie, it's definitely not the strongest deck at the moment, but it's really, really fun. And nothing can make your day like a 5 or 7 mana for Sky's Descend off. Fortunately, I didn't have full gameplay recordings for any of the games that happened in though. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more deck guides like this, please leave a like and subscribe. I try to do videos on different decks every week, and next week I'll be experimenting with the new Vaults of Helia card. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a good day.